Well, good afternoon, everybody. We have 30 people in the room right now, which we had about 50 folks registered for today. So I consider that critical mass for us to go ahead and get going. As you can see, we are recording the conversation today. So if you don't know me, my name is Deacon Nick Bates, Director of the Hunger Network in Ohio. This meeting is going to be recorded for about the first 30 to 40 minutes, and then we will turn off the recording for conversation and questions. That way, the presentation can be recorded and viewed by others, and then we can speak, because I know sometimes people feel a little nervous asking questions, knowing that people can go back and view it out of context and that sort of thing. So we'll cut off the recording at the end of the formal presentation for dialogue and conversation. Before we go too far, I want to give people a couple of dates to keep on their calendars. November 10th and December 10th. On November 10th, we are going to hold our annual celebration at All Saints Lutheran Church on the north side of Columbus in Worthington. And then on December 10th, we are going to hold our Advocacy in Advent event. So you all are invited to come down to the State House and join us for a day of advocacy. If you're unfamiliar with the Hunger Network in Ohio, we are a statewide ecumenical faith-based network that works to end hunger by addressing the root causes of poverty through advocacy. As we seek to end hunger in Ohio, we have come across a growing number of legislators and community members who are no longer asking, how can we end hunger, but are asking who is worthy to receive their daily bread. And we believe this is a result of a growing white Christian nationalism in our communities, because Christian nationalism is a force that seeks to divide instead of bringing people together to solve problems. So for us, as an advocacy organization looking to address issues such as affordable housing, childcare, and hunger, as well as many other systemic issues, we believe we need to address Christian nationalism so that we can come together in our communities, in our congregations, as well as the state of Ohio to address these needs. I'd like to begin with a word of prayer. Peace be with you. Heavenly Creator, thank you for bringing us together today. Thank you for the gifts that you have freely given to this world. You have provided us with enough to be sustained and not only to survive from day to day, but to truly thrive. Give us the courage and the wisdom and the patience to come together as community, to overcome our differences, to embrace the diversity that is you, so that we may live into the beloved community. In your mysterious name we pray. Amen. All right. So before we dive into what Christian nationalism is, I want to begin with what Christian nationalism is not. Christian nationalism is not about patriotism. I enjoy the 4th of July. I enjoyed rooting for the United States team during the Olympics. There's a lot of really great events there. I enjoyed going to the baseball game and eating a hot dog, and I think the Guardians are going to come back still against the Yankees in this AL American League Conference Championship. We can be patriotic. We can enjoy these things. We can love our country. And Christian nationalism is something else. Christian nationalism also isn't very Christian. It does not follow the teachings of Christ. It is not grounded in Scripture. It in fact actually negates and goes against a lot of the things that we read in the Christian scriptures. Christian nationalism is also not historically or scientifically based. You'll hear a lot of claims from people in the Christian nationalist movement about, well, the founders said this and this has to be the case. Well, actually, the founders didn't say that. And even if they did, they're broken and fallen human beings just like the rest of us. There's also claims about scientific superiority. This is where there's a big overlap between Christian nationalism and white nationalism. There's a massive overlap between those two. So you'll hear claims that men are just naturally better for leadership. Men are inherently better and more dominant. Those aren't actually scientifically based. That is based in cultural assumptions, not in history or science. So what is Christian nationalism? Christian nationalism is a cultural framework. And I like this idea of it being a cultural framework because think of a picture. Think of what is inside that frame. An artist will intentionally choose what he puts in, he or she or they put into that picture and what they exclude, right? Because they're going to be trying to communicate an idea, an emotion, or something like that. So as we think of a cultural framework, think of an actual picture frame. And what are people deciding to put in? What are people deciding to leave out? So within the realm of Christian nationalism, there's a very intentional inclusion of certain Christian views and American civic life to merge them together while excluding anything that challenges that fusion, excluding things such as diversity, excluding things such, even at times of democracy, to fuse their worldview in this manner. Christian nationalism is a political ideology first that generates a theology. So they will be people that will have a worldview and then go back and try to find scriptural passages to justify it or Christian traditions to justify it. And this has happened for many, many centuries where people will go to the Christian texts or other religious texts and try to justify their beliefs and their attitudes about the world. There is a claim in Christian nationalism that the US Constitution is divinely inspired and enjoys godlike status, even though Thomas Jefferson himself said that the Constitution should be rewritten every generation. It believes that Christianity should be a privileged religion in the United States, even though the founders explicitly excluded it from being a founding faith tradition. They also believe that good Americans must hold Christian beliefs, especially, and not necessarily around, do they know their catechism and can they recite the, all of the meaning, of the 10 Commandments, but certain beliefs around what is family, what are good traditions, what are bad traditions, and how are we called to live our lives. There is also a strong belief that faith is only for personal salvation. And this creates you are either in or you are out. Many of you are probably familiar with the idea of the prosperity gospel, and the prosperity gospel is heavily influenced both ways with Christian nationalism, where if you are beloved by God, you will be prosperous, you will be in the in group, and everyone who isn't prosperous must have done something to upset God, and therefore they are on the out group. And Christian nationalism is very much about creating an in-group and an out-group. The academics have looked at this subject. Whitehead and Perry, in their book, Taking America Back for God, on the subject of Christian nationalism, have broken Christian nationalists into 4 categories. There are the ambassadors. Those are actively out there trumpeting and leading the charge in a lot of these things. These are those YouTube videos you see, certain politicians you might hear who are really trying to sow seeds of division and anger in our communities. But then there are the accommodators. And I think we all probably know an accommodator. These are the people, the uncle at Thanksgiving dinner who will rant about a certain conspiracy theories that they are believing in, or rant against, the environmentalist hoax in our world that's calling us to care for God's creation. And most of you, my assumption is, since you are taking an hour out of your day for this conversation, probably fall into the category of resistors and rejectors. Those are the folks who are actively, resisting, not real big fans, and then rejectors, probably many of you who are trying to figure out, how do I respond to people in my community? So how did these academics break people into these categories? They had people do self-surveys identifying their views and attitudes, and they broke those views into these categories. Do they approve of authoritarian tactics? Are they willing to have coercion, forced prayer in school, forcing the 10 Commandments to be posted? Do they fear and distrust religious minorities? We saw after 9/11 the amount of Islamophobia in this country ratchet up. We saw the amount of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism over the past year ratchet up. So we see at times as society these anti-religious or distrust of religious minorities grow. There's a willingness to accept police and even condone police violence when used towards Black and minority Americans. They believe racial inequality is due to personal shortcomings of minority groups and report being very uncomfortable with things like interracial marriage and transracial adoption. They hold anti-immigrant views. They fear refugees. I think here in Ohio, we have seen how that is playing out with the allegations being made about our neighbors in Springfield. They oppose scientists. They do not want expansion of science education in classrooms and in schools. And there's this, what I like to call a super patriarchy, where men are absolutely better for this kind of leadership and women are better suited for care of children and in the home. And we have seen that extend also in the arguments around LGBTQI plus community rights. I think the big thing for us as we look at this, especially remembering that of those numbers, that about a third are in the accommodators. A third of Americans are accommodators of Christian nationalism. And I feel that many of these are the people that we can reach, that we can talk to, that we can help them work through. But we have to understand why they are kind of shifting in this pathway towards this harmful force. I think one of the big things is there's a lot of anxiety and fear in our world. And there are individuals who are very intentionally using that to manipulate others into this Christian nationalist movement. So people have fear. I grew up in the Cleveland area. I watched factories closing in the 90s and early 2000s. We see it happening in places like Youngstown or, and throughout the state of Ohio. There's a lot of male insecurity as women have gained more equality, and more the jobs right now that are starting to have some economic security, things like teachers, nurses, career centers or career paths that are dominated by women. So, and then male jobs, in construction and the trades have seen a drop off, and manufacturing because of automation and outsourcing and all these complicated economic realities. You see then this a dad is feeling anxious about whether or not he can provide for his family. And somebody comes along and says it's women's fault. And it's a very natural place that people can be led to. Christian nationalism also has a promise of community. There is a promise that if you join this movement, you get to wear the t-shirt, you get to be in the in crowd. So no matter what society is telling you is good or bad, you are right. You are right with God. You are right with the future of this country. And so people lacking community gravitate towards this. And we see in areas throughout the state of Ohio and throughout the country, ever since integration began, people have fled our cities into the suburbs. And that moved us from a position of having, people sitting on their front porch and parking on the street and walking in and seeing their neighbors, to people driving up, parking in their garages attached to their houses, hanging on their back patios instead of front porches. Right? It's this whole concept of the bowling alone that we've had for 25 years, where people have become more isolated. Christian nationalism has offered community to folks that didn't have it otherwise. It also offers promised easy to understand solutions. So we first heard that they're going to deport, that some people thought we should deport all the illegal immigrants, and that's their language, to now they're talking about deporting legal migrants, people that have paperwork, people that have come here, done the paperwork, are now being threatened with deportation, because deportation sounds like an easy answer. Bans, on, gender affirming care, tariffs, make them pay, tough on crime. Both political parties can get trapped into these easy to understand solutions. Tough on crime, remember, is often in response to drug addiction, a mental health issue, not a criminal justice issue. I always do remember on this tough on crime issue where Governor Kasich, back in 2016, when he was running for president, he was in New Hampshire, one of the most white states in the country, and he lifted this up that it was a shame that it took us having the opioid epidemic and for those struggling with addiction to look more like us, Caucasian Americans, for us to recognize it was a mental health issue and not a criminal justice one. Obviously, it did not catch on. He did not win that primary election, but we can see on how these kind of things take hold. The other thing with Christian nationalism is it creates easy to identify enemies. Blame the immigrants, blame the LGBTQIA community, blame teachers, liberals, environmentalists, and craft beer drinkers. If you recall back in, I think it was probably 2015, 2016, 2017, sometime around that time, Budweiser ran a national ad campaign during the Super Bowl where they had an ad making fun of craft beer drinkers for fussing over their beer. And a lot of people laughed, and I watched a lot of men laughing about this. And I'm kind of like, wait a second, this doesn't quite make sense. Why are we attacking craft beer drinkers? But any kind of group where you can make fun of, put down, and belittle, and they were using very machismo, masculine and patriarchal images and concepts in this advertisement. So they were trying to sell a product, but they leaned into this super patriarchy. Now, the craft beer industry did respond very quickly with their own ad and said, yes, we do fuss over our beer because we care about flavor. So just a kind of a lighthearted example of how this does play out and can be very subtle and kind of just ingrained as part of the American culture right now. But then it creates this mindset that says it is okay to divide people, to promote a product, to promote a politician, to promote a framework of how the world should be. Here are some images around Christian nationalism. So, just kind of to walk through these very quickly. Here you can see kind of a Jesus-like image standing above everybody else, focused on the cross, all the people in the crowd focused on the cross while draped in an American flag. Jesus did not come for just America. Jesus came to save and to provide love for everybody. Here's another one. When you thought you hit a dog, but it was just a climate change protester. Once again, this kind of mockery, this crude humor, it plays very well to attract people in because people then laugh at this. If that's their initial reaction, is to laugh, and then people respond, hey, why'd you laugh at that? Then people get defensive. People put up their walls. And that's what Christian nationalists want to have happen. They want somebody's instinct is to laugh at this, and then they put up their walls to shut out other people. But what is this image doing? It is relegating someone who's a climate change protester down to an animal status, and not even a valuable animal like a dog, but even below that. And as we have seen people drive their cars through rallies, causing injury and even death. This is a very disturbing image. Jesus believed in concealed carry. Hit like if you agree. You can see, a child with a gun. Obviously, the whiteness of Jesus and the child. The Confederate flag with the American flag. And I can't quite tell if this was intentional or not, but the Confederate flag is actually sitting slightly above the American flag, which is very problematic for those of us who do like to be patriotic. As you should know, the American flag should never sit below another flag. They might be considered equal, but to me, it looks like it's slightly elevated. And one of the things that really bothers me about this as a faith leader in the Christian church is Jesus was offered the opportunity for concealed carry, and Jesus said no. When Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane, the Roman soldiers led by Judas came to arrest him, and they broke out the sword and sliced off the ear, and Jesus said, "Put that away," and healed the man's ear. So just because, so Jesus had the opportunity to fight back. Jesus had the opportunity to have concealed arms with him to defend him against an oppressive empire, And Jesus said no. This is an image that I first saw probably back in 2015, 2016. And I've seen it with different forms of Uncle Sam, including one very muscular and macho looking Uncle Sam. But plays into the idea that we saw during the 1980s that really took off, this myth of the welfare queen. And you can, as somebody who does anti-poverty work, you can look at the data and realize it's not true. It is racist. It is a racial myth that was made up very intentionally during the 70s and the 80s to try to defund public assistance programs, even though many white folks were benefiting from them as well as African Americans. They wanted to defund all of it. And we continue to see these attacks, these myths that are grounded in racism. And the term baby daddy is specifically being used to kind of draw in that racial component of this around public benefits and assistance programs like SNAP, like Medicaid, like TANF assistance, childcare subsidies, and these things that we know work to help strengthen the economy and strengthen our communities. Also, as we saw this past summer, with the kind of that super patriarchy, it also has kind of led to a lot of the tension around trans athletes. And we have seen in Ohio, Governor DeWine vetoed House Bill 68, but the legislature came back from their Christmas break early to override it. But one of the big things, as we saw this past summer, Imani Khalif, the Algerian boxer, was born a woman, grew up as a woman, has always participated in sports as a woman, and is a woman, was accused of being a man. Some people say it was hormones. Some people say, well, just look how hard she boxes. Just all these different ideas have emerged. So within this idea that only somebody who is male could punch hard is leading to that toxic masculinity, right? The idea that she was being accused of being a man because people didn't like her. And this is something that we fear is likely to happen in Ohio among high school girl athletes, is any woman, any teenage girl who's, has a little bit of extra body hair or is a little bit more muscular looking is likely going to be accused of being trans. And what does that mean? A genital check on the court, a DNA check? I've never had my chromosomes analyzed, so I don't know what they are. So you can see on how this continues to play out in pop culture as well as in our politics. And then I think one of the big signs of Christian nationalism we saw was January 6th of 2021. People were carrying crosses and their flags. They were praying because they felt that what they were doing was what God had called them to do, to try to destroy, to damage the state, to damage the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., and try to do harm to Vice President Mike Pence at that time. And there's still the question remains, if they would have accessed the physical copies of the paperwork that certified the election, what would have happened? Here in Ohio, we see Christian nationalism rearing its head in many ways around education, on democracy issues. During the debate in the Ohio General Assembly back in 2023 about whether or not to have that August special election, that would have made it harder for citizens to initiate constitutional amendments. One group was asked, well, if this is such a good change, why don't we just wait to put on the November ballot? And the answer was, well, that's going to be after a state issue around abortion rights is on the ballot. And we don't want to make it harder for us to try to repeal it down the road. So regardless of where an individual falls on the issue of abortion rights, shouldn't citizen groups have the same rules on whether or not they're going to be expanding abortion rights or limiting them in the state of Ohio? But they said no, and they had no qualms about saying it doesn't matter whether or not we have the same rules. We want to just get our way. We've seen the attacks on the LGBTQI plus community, and then also racism. There are new bills being introduced at the Ohio State House to target immigrants, including legal immigrants such as the Haitians in Springfield. And the funding of public benefits is also something that we are watching and fighting back against regularly. So how do we respond? The first thing I want to say is we must maintain our own healthy boundaries in responding. If, as a straight, cisgendered, middle class, middle-aged white guy, I have a lot of freedom. I have a lot of privilege to respond where my personal identity will not be attacked the same way as if you're a woman, LGBTQIA+, a racial minority, an immigrant, or if you have family that are immigrants. So I put that caveat out there to say you have to protect yourself first, because as we see, violence can occur. But the first thing I would say when you are able to do so safely is always to proclaim the gospel. As Christians, for most of us on the call today, our faith tradition offers us a community grounded in hope, centered on the cross. That not even the cross can contain us, not even the grave can contain us, but new life will emerge. So we need to build up an idea as an alternative, to build up something new and hopeful. Proclaim the love of God that God has extended not just to Americans, not just to white folks, not just to men, but to everybody. The second thing we need to do is remember to love our neighbors. I always say we got to prioritize those who are on the margins, prioritize our LGBTQIA+ neighbors, our migrant neighbors, and them. But then we are still also called to love those who are in the Christian nationalist throes and in that movement. So reach out to them, show them love and compassion. And I think one of the main ways we can do this is by recognizing their fear and their anxiety. Talk about why diversity and love are better solutions to the economic and social anxieties they feel. As we look at different policy proposals that are kind of coming along with this Christian nationalist movement, we can see that those policy decisions aren't actually going to solve the problem. Right? Deporting a bunch of people will actually hurt our local economy, not help it. So let's try to sit down and figure out real solutions. Figure out, kind of what is the problem? As you look at a lot of industries, it's not even outsourcing. Some of it is, but a lot of it is automation. So what does that mean? Do we stop automation? Do we figure out alternatives? There's a lot of different ideas that we can come up with to still create economic sustainability for American families while living into the economic realities of the world today. And then finally, as I began today, talking about this framework, they're developing a picture. And I think a lot of times we want to just go in and say, here's why your picture is wrong. But what we have to do is just deconstructing their framework is never going to solve the problem. How do we create a new framework? One that shows the diversity and love of God, that shows the beloved community, that shows that how we can be a multicultural, multi-ethnic community that values people with different abilities and ideas. So I always like to, some people want the big, heavy ideas, and that's what those were. And these are some pragmatic steps. So social media, anger drives social media engagement. If you go onto TikTok, for example, you'll see people doing Facebook or TikTok lives, saying, I love this presidential candidate, or saying, I love this presidential candidate. Their goal is to get people who disagree with them typing as fast as they can. This is why you're wrong. This is why you're wrong. This is why you're wrong. Because you type 10 things why they're wrong. That's 10 engagements for them. And that's what they want. They want your eyeballs yelling at them. Anger drives it. So one of the things I always say to people, if you look on Facebook, somebody shares a meme, such as oh, I thought I had a dog, but it's just a climate change protester. You see somebody share that image, don't comment on the image. Don't comment publicly. Send them a private message and have the conversation that way. I think we need to call out the fear. Fear cancels out logic. So I think a great example of this is I could sit down, give you all a 20-minute presentation on what we need to do around affordable housing. We'll probably have that webinar early next year. So come on back. And you'll all be saying, yes, I agree, I agree, I agree. That's a great idea. Let's move forward with it. More multifamily housing and more diverse communities. Sounds great. And then all someone has to do is stand up and say, yeah, but a criminal might move in next door and hurt your children. And then all the logic is out the window. And that fear cancels it all out. Because what parent doesn't have a concern for their children? And as soon as that fear comes in, logic is gone. So what we need to do is make sure we are calling that out and saying, I think that's a fear tactic. I think you're just trying to cancel this out. Yet one of the social anxieties people fear is around affordable or the cost of housing. Yet the fear around racial diversity, the fear around immigrants moving in, is actually one of the causes that keeps us from building more multifamily housing developments and programs that lead to higher cost of housing and our zoning laws and all this. So the exact thing that would solve the problem, people are saying don't do because we're afraid of the diversity it might bring. And as I was saying earlier, we can't just call out harmful behaviors, but we have to amplify what we are for. So it's not that, a lot of times we hear, well, they're receiving all these government payments, they're receiving all this money, and the response for among many immigrant justice folks is say, well, they're not receiving government subsidies, they're not receiving these payments. But that's just trying to counter their falsehood. What we need to do is shift the narrative to say, you know what, I would like us to do more to support new Americans and new neighbors who are moving here. Scripture calls us to welcome the stranger and to treat them as our own. So when Scripture calls us to that position, we should advocate that and amplify that message, because then it's the migrants that are moving to our communities actually enrich our community. We're not just tolerating them being there, but we can truly celebrate them as God's beloved children. And we should use personal examples. Broken community cannot be healed with data and logic. And I know a lot of times when I talk to clergy, very well educated, we read the reports, we read the data, and we use that to try to make our argument. We're talking about a picture. We're talking about an art project here. We're talking about that framework. We have to use our personal narratives, our personal stories. If someone asks me why I trust doctors on issues like vaccines, or when doctors and the Children's Hospital Association is coming out saying gender-affirming care saves lives, I can reference back to when Children's Hospital here in Columbus saved my daughter's life from a very, very difficult birth. And I can share that story with them. I can also share the story around, when the Cleveland baseball team changed their name from the Indians to the Guardians. I had an individual very, heard that I was from Cleveland after a worship service, was very angry. Oh, you must be super angry. I thought I would agree with them about the name change and personal vulnerability. I said, well, I remember what I wore to those games back in the 1980s and 90s. I remember the cheers that I did. And so this immediately shifted the conversation from me wagging my finger at him to me saying, yeah, I did it too. And then the shift then into a new vision was me talking about growing up on the West Side and driving in and seeing those Guardians of Traffic statues and never knowing where they were, but it's just one of these great memories I had as a child. So I was really able to celebrate the name change. So finding ways like that to be able to celebrate and to overcome kind of the misinformation and all of that with personal examples is going to go a lot farther than trying to use data or kind of that logical argument approach. So in conclusion, we are called to create a new framework. We are called to paint this image of a beloved community. I'm always reminded at the end of Revelation, where it talks about, what this new kingdom is going to look like. Trees producing fruit, crystal clear water flowing down the middle, gates that are left open. And while that is a divine image that we are given, how can we mirror that? How can we reflect that in our communities? Can we magically make it happen with one policy or one election? No. Can we just will it into being through logic and debate? No. But can we build that community? Can we strive to live into a beloved community together where all of God's children are loved and respected and given the dignity that we all possess as children of God. So thank you very much. You can see my email there if you have any questions. And at this time, I am going to turn off the recording and open the conversation up for questions.